Alrighty, good afternoon. For today's show, we are going to be talking about Lab 4.2.8, which is configuration of a router on a stick inter-VLAN routing. So this is kind of a guess at what labs are probably going to be coming up this week. But in this case here, we have our router, which is going to be doing the routing between the VLANs. We have S1 and we have S2 we're going to be utilizing. PCB is going to be on one of the switch ports. PCA is going to be on the other switch port. We're going to have a trunk between our router and our switch, and we're going to have another trunk between our switch and our switch. And everything else is going to be either configured as access or be chucked into a holding area, which is called the parking VLAN, the parking lot, basically. So we're given our addressing table. It's all IPv4, which makes it pretty easy. We are given some sub interfaces, which we will look at in a bit. But basically, the sub interfaces correspond to 3, 4, and 8 for the VLANs. So we see 3, 4, and 8. The switches are going to be residing their management VLAN, which is on VLAN 3. And so we'll see here how switch 1 and 2's management VLANs will both reside on VLAN 3. Our operations VLAN is going to have specifically switch port 2, which is the PC. So the PC is going to be residing on the operations VLAN for PCB. And for PCA, it looks like it's going to be residing on, yes, switch 1 FA06. So the fast Ethernet 06 is going to be there. And nothing's going to go inside of the native VLAN, which is what's used to tag traffic that doesn't have a VLAN associated with it. So speeding over the little gist of it, but basically we already have our network configured, so we don't have to do anything like that. However, we are going to need to go through and configure some basic settings for the router and some basic settings for the switch. Now, when going through these specific steps, right now, as with everything going on, it's fairly well advised to avoid setting these passwords, just because if something does break, then, or if you mistype, or if you're copying stuff from somewhere, those passwords can end up causing some interesting predicaments for everybody else who comes behind you. In terms of the last step as well, setting the clock on the router, we can talk about that, but the clock, for the most part, is set. There's nothing really to change on that, so we can talk about how you can look at it, maybe, if you'd like. And then we'll discuss configuring the PC host, which I find is pretty easy for the most part. And creating the VLANs, assigning switch ports to them. So we're going to do that on both switches. We're going to have to configure our 802.1q trunk. On both sides, that's fine there. We can take a look at the trunking afterwards, and then we'll notice how the trunking behaves when an interface is not up and up. And then we'll have to go to the router and configure our inter-VLAN routing. So configuring our encapsulation on that particular, those particular sub-interfaces, as well as also ensuring that the interface is actually online with the sub-interfaces, which we can do through the show IP interface brief. And then we will do a little ping check, basically, to check to make sure PCA is able to ping out, and PCA can ping PCB, and PCA can ping switch 2. And that's one thing we'll also notice as well. If we look at our PCA and PCB, you'll notice that they are assigned now a default gateway. Similarly, the switches are assigned a default gateway, which happens to coincide with the router that's on the stick. So that being the sub-interface for VLAN 3, the sub-interface for VLAN 4. So with that being said, let's grab this. We will throw it on the other screen so I can see it. And we will go through and do some configurations. So first things first, it does want us to configure the router. Specifically, it looks like it's router 1, if I recall correctly. Yes, it'd be router 1. So let's open up our router 1. We are not going to go into the initial configuration. for that. Let's go over here. We can load up our switch. Make sure those are all good to go. Oh, yeah. See, we got lots of stuff coming up on the router. That's good. So first things first, obviously, we're going to need to go into our enable, and then we're going to need to go into global configuration, config T. And the next thing I like to do is we're going to go into line con 0, and we're going to issue the command logging synchronous, basically. So logging sync for short form. And what that's going to do is if we ever get these gigantic lines of information popping up, it's always going to make sure our text is moved down to the next current line. Let me just get the instructions on what we need to be configuring or what it wants us to. So we've gone to enable privilege execution mode. We've gone to global configuration mode. We need to assign a device name to the router. So for that, we are going to issue the command hostname R1. It's going to drop us back a mode. And then we're going to need to disable our DNS lookup. So no IP domain dash lookup. It wants us to assign a password as class in privilege execution mode. So we're going to skip over that. But if you were going to be configuring that, it would be the enable secret, and then you would issue class. It wants us to go into our line console. So let's go to line console 0. We are not going to configure a password. So if you were going to configure one, you would type in password Cisco, and then afterwards we would type in the command login, which would then tell the router that it needs to look at that password. So do not type in the word login unless you are typing in a password. Otherwise, you will end up locking yourself out of the system. If you were looking to encrypt your passwords, we would use the service password encryption, which would be issued actually one prompt backwards. Service password encryption. That's something we can definitely issue. It's not going to cause any concerns. Con 0. So we've done our logging synchronous. The other thing we can do as well, if we were looking to, push it out, so to speak, so we could do the exact. What is it? It's exact timeout. That's exact. There we go. Exact timeout. So we set it to a say, for instance, 5. Well, we can do a quick check here and say minutes. So every 5 minutes, it'll basically kick you out, and you just got to go back in again. That's entirely up to you what you want to do. But that's what I'm going to enter there. And then next up, we're going to go to our VTYs. So VTY 015. Same thing as before. Normally, we'd be entering in the password as Cisco. We'd enter the login. We're not doing either of those. I am, however, going to still do the exact timeout on these. 5. I'm also going to issue the command, like I did on the line console, of logging synchronous. So that way, if you were to log into through the VTY, the telnet lines, then you wouldn't have your, text you're typing in basically be shot across the router without any knowledge. We need to configure our banner message of the day. So banner MOTD, our delimiting character. In this case, we are going to do some sort of thing. Authorized. Help if I spelled stuff right. Access is only allowed. Bam. So we got our banner message of the day, which is fantastic. Basically something there. It asks you to save the configs to startup. Obviously, we're not doing that. In our thing here, we can issue the command. What is it? Clock status. Clock. So clock has been read. So I guess technically it's really not to what it should be, but it's not the end of the world. If you were going to set the clock, you would be using the clock set command, and you would supply it in a UTC format, meaning, you know, if we were currently in our current time zone, it would be something like, say, for instance, clock set, if the time was 5 o'clock, you add 12 to that, so it would become 1700, if it was 30 after, 30, etc. And then you go day, month, but the month has to be spelled out entirely in the year. So I'm not going to issue the command, but I'll show you an example of how it would go. So you could do something like clock set. Right now it's 5:40, so we could do clock set 5:40, 0 seconds, and today is the 14th of February, 2022. And then you'd basically press enter, and then that's how you would set the clock, should you want to set the clock, right? So next up in here, it wants us to configure the basic settings for our switches. So we got 2 switches we need to deal with. So if I remember correctly, this one's going to be our first switch. So enable privilege mode, config T. We are going to host name S1. We can do a service password from here while we're icon 0. Logging synchronous. We're not issuing any of the password stuff. However, I am going to do the exact timeout. So that way we can change it out of the default mode. We're going to do our line Vtys 015. Logging synchronous. Exact timeout 5. We can do our banner message of the day as well. Perfect. So we got that going on now. We got our service password, our logging synchronous, exact timeout. Is there anything else we need? Oh, we missed one important thing. No IP-domain lookup. There we go. No IP domain dash lookup. And we're going to need to do this with the other piece of equipment. What's the escapee key? So we will go to switch number 2. We'll go to our enable mode, global configuration, host name S2. IP domain dash lookup, service password encryption, line on 0, logging sync, exact dash time. There we go, 5, line VTY 015, logging sync, exact timeout 5, and we got to do our banner, message of the day, authorized access only allowed. Cool, so we're dropped back there. Okay, so host name, no IP domain lookup, service password encryption, line con, logging sync, exact timeout 5, exact timeout for VTY, logging sync, banner message of the day. That looks like we've captured everything that's required. Nothing special. It does mention, as I said before, that it wants us to save the configs. Obviously, we're not doing that in this example. So next up, we are going to be setting up the VLANs on both these switches. So let me just bring us back to that table, and I'll show you what we need to be setting up. So basically, if we look at the table at the beginning of this lab, we will see we have our table of VLANs 3, 4, 7, and 8. So we need to do that in both of our switches, assigning a name, and setting them up. So on this one, we're on switch 2 right now, so we're going to do VLAN 3, name, management. VLAN. Help if I spelled VLAN correctly. VLAN 4. Name, operation. VLAN 7. What is that called? Parking lot. Parking lot. VLAN 8 name. This one is the native VLAN. Coolio. So let's go back over to the other one. We'll do the same thing over here. VLAN 3 name management. VLAN 4 name operations. VLAN 5.7 name parking lot. VLAN 8 VLAN perfect name native. What else did it want us to do? It wants us to assign. Okay, so we configured this. Oh, we got to configure the default. Okay, we got to configure the management for VLAN 3 on both of those, and we also need to configure our default gateway. And we will also need to move all of our interfaces we don't need into access mode so that they're unused and they're deactivated. Cool enough. So we are on switch 1. So on switch 1, we are going to be configuring an IP address of 192.168.3.1 for this interface. So we can do our interface VLAN 3. You'll see the prompt has changed. We also notice that we've now gained a nice new wonderful switched virtual interface. So we have our interface VLAN 3, IP address 192.168.3.11, 255.255.255.0. There we go. We need to bring our interface online, so no shutdown, and then we can drop back out. Once we've dropped back out, we can also go ahead and configure our default gateway. So IP default gateway 192.168.3.1. And on our switch 2, we need to do the exact same thing. Let me just see something as well. Do show IP int. Okay, that's fine. It will be down until we bring up either a trunk or we assign something into it. So that's fine. It can sit like that for the time being. So let's do the same thing over here. We're going to do our interface VLAN 3. We see now we're in interface global configuration, and we are no longer in VLAN configuration. IP address 192.168.3.12.255.0. No shut. And default gateway 192.168.3.1. Okay, let me just make sure. Did I actually set that right? 3.1. Perfect. And if we do a do show IP int brief, same thing as well. We should see that the VLAN 3 is up and down, which is fine because nothing's been assigned to it yet, so that's how it'll sit. So next thing we need to do is we need to move all the interfaces we don't need to their appropriate places. So on switch 1, it's going to be everything except for 101 and 106 and 105. And on switch 2, it's going to be 101 and 1018, which is easy enough. 101 is the trunk, and 18 is the access port. So what I'm going to do to make life fairly easy is we're actually going to do show IP int brief. Let's just see what our ranges are. Is there only the 18? There's no extra ports on there, is there? 28. Cool. So what we can do is we can do our interface range. So int interface range G102. And this one, we go all the way to 18. Yes. 2 to 17. G10 / 19. And we're going to go 19 to the end, which is 28. Okay, we can do our shutdown. Now that we've shut them down, we can also assign them into access mode, and we can shove them into the parking lot. So notice how this prompt just keeps it all happy-dappy the way it is. So we do our switch port mode access, so we're forcing them into access mode, so they're not going to be dynamic. We are going to do our access VLAN, and our parking lot VLAN was 7. So we're going to shove those over there. And was there anything else that we needed to do? Or to move, for that matter? Okay, so this is 2. Everything else is shut down. That's fantastic. Except for the first one, which is fine, because that's going to be our trunk. So let's quickly go do this on the other one as well. So over here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do our range, but let's just see what we have to work with first. Do show interface brief. This one appears to be a different router. We got an bunch of extra interfaces, so that's fine. So we're going to be moving some of these. So I think the easiest way to handle this one, int G 101/0/2 to 24, and we'll just pick up and fix the other ones afterwards. Which one is switch one? We need port 5. Why don't we just fix it properly? So let's just do this way. G1/0/6, and actually, see, I did this wrong. I need 5, so it should actually only be 4. So 6, and we are going to continue this down to 24. Or do I need 6? 6 I need as well. 7. So we're going to continue to that. And then we also can move our G1/1/1 to G1/1/4. Oh, I missed the command range. There. What did I screw up? Don't need that. There we go. Shutdown. Switch port mode access VLAN 7. And and they're shut down, so that's good. So you can see how my text continued and it didn't overlap, and that's because of the logging synchronous. So now that we have that, we can go ahead and configure our VLAN 3 for our PCA. Okay, so that's F06, and PCB is F018. All right, well, easy enough. So on this one, let's go ahead and we can do our interface G1/0/6 port mode access switch port access VLAN 3. And on this one, we need to do it for port 18. So we can do interface G1/0/18. And we need to configure switch port access VLAN, and this is VLAN 4. And we got to force it over to access as well. So switch port mode access. It's always going to dynamically assign itself to an access port because it's plugged into the PC, but we want to force it that way so someone can't plug in a switch and do something different. So now what we can do is our do show VLAN brief, and we can basically see everything except for our 101 is inside of the correct places. So parking lot has it, 18 has that one. Let's go over to this one. We can do our do show VLAN brief. So this one we have 101 and 105 because we have the router on a stick, which is going to be 105, and the switch to switch is going to be 101. Okay, so we can now go interface FA0/1. Oh, it's not FA, it's G101. And switch port mode trunk. And it's now going to flip over, and you'll notice all the states of our interfaces are going to change now as well. Same thing as well on this side, interface G101. Now we don't need to configure a trunk on both sides. However, it did ask us to configure a trunk on both sides. As you noticed, once you configure one side, because the other side is in a specific state, it's going to dynamically switch over to be a trunk port. It did also ask for us to configure the native VLAN to our VLAN that we've configured, which is 8. So we'll do our switch port trunk native VLAN 8. And let's go do this on the other side so we don't get bombarded with mass amounts of flapping interfaces. So switch port trunk native VLAN 8. There we go. Our VLAN mismatch is now going to be happy. We also are going to go ahead and configure our allowed VLANs on there to be every VLAN with the exception of the parking lot. We don't want the parking lot to be on there. So 3, 4, and 8. Same thing on this side. We can do our switch port trunk allowed VLAN 3, 4, 8. And we can do a little check on our interfaces. So do show int trunk. So we can see G101 is on, 802.1 encapsulation. It's in trunking. Native VLANs assigned to 8. We see we got VLANs allowed on the trunk is 3 through 4 and 8. And if we do that on both sides, we'll see the same thing. Do show int trunk. Looks good to me. So next up, we need to go ahead and configure our interface. So interface 101, switch port mode trunk. Oh, no, not 101. We need to do 5. Interface G1/O/5, switch port mode trunk, switch port trunk native VLAN 8, and we need to configure the trunk allowed VLAN 3, 4, and 8. Oh, I spelled something wrong. There we go. And if we do that same thing again, we do our show int trunk, you'll notice it doesn't actually get added because that specific interface, if we do a do show IP int brief, you'll actually see 5 is still actually down and down because it's linked to a router. And if we recall, routers by default are going to be in a down state. So what we are going to do next is we're going to come over to our router. We're going to smack the key a few times, go into enable, go into global configuration, do an int G001, and of course it's not actually that interface. Let's just do a quick do show brief. What interface? 001. Okay, we're going to probably assume then that it's G01. So, do no shut. Let's see if it comes online for a second. Cool. So we actually did. The interface came online, so that's a good sign that we did pick the right interface. And we need to configure our sub-interfaces. So to do that, it's just as simple as G0/1, and then you go dot, and then what the VLAN is. So it's VLAN 3, so subinterface is 3. Encapsulation .1q, what is the VLAN? It's 3. IP address 192.168.3.1. Cool. Int G01.4. .1. Oh, what did I do? 4.1 configure IP, so it's allowed. It's subinterface already configured. Oh, I forgot the .1q thing, but not 3. We want 4. There we go. So now we can configure our IP address. Basically, it was just mad that I was trying to configure an address on something that shouldn't have had an address yet. So interface G01.8 for our native. Encapsulation .1q. It is VLAN 8, and it is the native VLAN. So now from here, we can do a end, drop us back, show IP int brief. And we can see we have 3 interfaces up and up. We have our 192.168.3.1, 192.168.4.1. They're both up and up. We have our native VLAN that doesn't have an IP address assigned to it, which is fine. So, did we need to do anything else here? Dun, 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 dun. I guess hypothetically, if you really... Oh, it says include a description. Yeah, see, I missed something. Config T. Gotta go back now. Description, native, VLAN. Sounds good. Yes, I know I spelled VLAN wrong. Number four was operations. Operations. And number three was management. Okay, so now that I've actually done what it asked me to do, we can go now back actually to our switch, and we can do our do show interface. Yep, now we can see our G101 is online. We can see that information about it because that interface has now come online. So we actually have to configure our PCs. I guess I missed that at some point in time in the lab. Whoopsie daisies. So let's quickly go do that. Not a big deal. Let's just clone this session. Bam. So we'll go to the VM window. Okay. Configure a second. Build. Yes. Yes. 2.168.4.0/24 192.168.4.1. Let's see, does this have the same collision like the other one did? It does. 4.10. We'll leave it at, I guess. Doesn't really matter that much there. So that is now configured. We can come back here. Let's just update the charts because it's not showing the first one, but I think it's because I just didn't wait for it to finish building while I was being impatient. Ah, it didn't even build at all. Well, that's exciting. Two dot 168.3.24. Okay, so let's let that thing go through, and we'll be back in just a second. All right, so now that we have this, we can do the final steps, which is doing a little bit of pinging. I'm actually going to connect to the VM because I hate using the automated thing. 192.168.3.1. Perfect. We can ping our default gateway. We can go ahead and try pinging the other PC. 192.1.4.10. Perfect. We can ping the other PC. And can we ping the other switch? Which was... What was the other switch's IP address? Switch 2 was 3.12. Perfect. And we can ping that as well. So with that being said, I think we are golden. Everything's online. There's no issues. Well, with that being said, we are all done. And yeah, all you'll need to do is just basically clear out the routers using your erase and removing the VLANs. And take care.